Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to WeatherBrains episode 852. This is the weekly program that's all about weather. And this is for Monday. What is this, May 16th? Yeah, it is May 16th, 2022. And we are getting that close to good old hot summertime. We're going to do mid 90s here. Of course, Troy Kimmel out in Austin, he's been, I think, already in the upper 90s. But anyway, this is the pre-show. And if you're looking for the actual show content, as always, move the slider over, about, let's see, 8 minutes. I'm a little early tonight. I've been late here lately. I'm trying to get on time here. So let me get all my chores done. But if you've never seen the pre-show here, this is a magical, marvelous time of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time we say really, really, really outrageous things. Been fighting a lot of trolls here lately. Is it me, or has the trolling gotten more severe here lately? I don't know. By the way, I forgot my fancy little, wireless AirPods. So I've gone old school here. I dug out these old white headsets out of the drawer here, which still work fine, and the battery's not going to die. And this computer actually has an audio jack. So many of these new computers, they've dumped all those ports, but I actually found a little audio jack so I could hear, without any feedback. But yeah, the trolls have just been really bad today. But let's invite everybody here. We'll talk about trolls. And that's just part of what we do, is dealing with them. But they have been really vicious the last few days. It's just a very strange world we live in here. Hopefully, everybody will be on the show tonight. I think everybody is around. We will see. All right, they have all been invited. Yeah, I don't even want to talk about the trolls because the way they work, they run in packs, and they attack you in mass. They don't typically do it in lone wolf style. It is just a large mass of the trolls, and they come in and try and take you down, and over the most bizarre things. And of course, one of the issues we're fighting now, it's people showing 384-hour model output, especially from the American Global Model, the GFS, that shows, major hurricanes making landfall on somewhere. And, if and the people that post that, their pages, they have this really intense following. It's almost like religious type. Very odd. And if you come up against them or say anything that might perceive to be a negative comment about what they're doing, and they're posting these, wild, scary 384-hour model maps, then they come attack you. It's a strange world we live in. And, the problem we have when they do that, I will have 3 dozen, is it true messages from people that have a beach trip planned, they have a wedding planned, I have to respond to that. And this is time I don't have. I mean, time is precious in my particular world as it is now. And I just don't have time to do that. I'll do it. I'll make time to do it because I need to respond. And the other thing that they don't understand, there are some people that have storm anxiety. And this is real storm anxiety. This is not some type of, they're making it up. They really have storm anxiety. And when they see this stuff, they become physically ill, where they can't go to work. They can't function well. And, that's, and so by doing that, you're totally ignoring the people that you're supposed to be serving. And we are all in a servant's position here. So sorry, I'm ranting. I'm on a pre-show rant. This is the one time I can.
That's to save your rants for the show, James.
Just talking about the hurricane model map people. It's gotten rough in the trenches And and again,
it's
when
not
you
even going to be a very bad hurricane if it is a hurricane, even or anything.
But the people with storm anxiety, they become literally ill, and
I can understand that. I was that way as a child.
Cancel vacation plans because of, Uncle Joe's Tot Locker and weather page on Facebag says a major hurricane is going to strike, Mobile Bay in 384 hours. And
you'd never go on vacation.
If you, and could there be a major hurricane in 384 hours? Yeah, there could be one then in June, July, August, September, October, November, anytime. I mean, it's
September,
anytime.
Remember. What's the same for August?
It is starting. I'll just say it this year. It's starting off really bad. And I have wasted so much of my time in the last 3 days putting this stuff down. Oops. And what's bad is that you spend all your time putting it down by answering individual messages that you get and putting out little. And again, I'm only going to post about it once. I'm one and done. But then you have to deal with the attackers that come from the Uncle Joe's Tot Locker and Facebook page that they attack anybody that comes up against what their leader is posting.
What's a Tot Locker, James?
You never heard the legend of Uncle Joe's Tot Locker? You've never heard that story?
No.
Oh! It is the
tell us about Uncle Joe's Tot Locker.
That's right. Story time.
Time. It is the absolute greatest. Rachel Callahan wrote an amazing piece on this. Uncle Joe's Tot Locker, an investigative report. And we'll put the link because a lot of people watch this. We'll put the link on the. I'll put it in the chat here, but just you can search it out. Uncle Joe's Tot Locker, an investigative report.
That's awesome.
And it started with a snowstorm we had here, and the TV stations crawl closings on the bottom of the screen. And a local station crawled Uncle Joe's Tot Locker closed because of snow. and so,
oh, that's great.
And then the best she talks about, they were talking about potential business spinoffs for Uncle Joe, including Aunt Jolene's preschooler prison, Jeremy's House of Slobber, Sister Sarah's Senior Storage, and Farmer Phil's Baby Barnyard.
There you go.
That's great.
It just goes on and on.
Man.
But anyway,
awesome.
When I talk about the rogue Facebook pages with their, hurricane and snow deals, I always call it Uncle Joe's Tot Locker and weather page to honor the legend of Uncle Joe in this market.
That's awesome.
Oh, I love it.
There's Sean Potter.
But yeah,
hey, Sean Potter.
We've had a.
Yeah, we can hear you good. Can you
hear guys hear me?
Yeah.
You'd prefer me to have the camera off, is what you're saying. You don't want to see my.
No.
That's not true at all.
True.
It's good to see you all.
We're always glad to see you, Sean.
Sean almost sounded sincere when he said that. Almost.
Almost. Right.
He's getting up there in terms of number of apperances.
I thought you were going to say he's getting up there in terms of age. I thought is
no, we don't talk about age on this show.
Right. I'm losing track. I think the last one was December 2020, so it was over a year ago, almost a year and a half ago now.
Well, you're only as old as you would be if you didn't know how old you were, something to that effect. So I think I'm 30, therefore I am.
And if you get older and start, developing dementia or Alzheimer's or something, losing your memory, then you don't know how old you are. So does that mean you're actually younger?
I guess that's true. That's probably true.
All right,
I hope that
here.
David's going to join us.
Is Dave?
John?
Yeah,
he's not here yet. He may have fallen asleep and forgotten.
It's almost 1 a.m. there.
Right. We've never successfully had a British visitor, I don't think.
Well, he's not British,
Oh, I know. I mean,
but The accent will give it
away. I know that. Yeah.
Let's get this thing started here. We're late. Welcome to our TV viewers. Thank you for bearing with us. And here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
WeatherBrains is brought to you by Midland Weather Radio. Every home, school, and business should have a Noaa Weather Radio, the official voice of the National Weather Service. And the AMS Weather Band.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
Hey, it's WeatherBrains. This is episode number 852 for the 16th of May, 2022. WeatherBrains, the weekly show that is all about weather. And we are delighted that you are here. And I see, looks like the whole gang is here tonight. Jen, welcome back. Good to have you back. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. I missed you guys. Been super busy. Severe weather the first week, and then last week was family time. And we had my nieces. She's 9. We had her recital weekend. She did great. So super cute to see her and how she did with her dance for. She was in so many dances. It was awesome to watch her. And she does competition as well. She's become a really great little dancer. It'll be great to see how she does here the next several years and follow in her sister's footsteps, who danced for pretty much her whole childhood too. So it was fun. I'm glad to see you all and to be back and amongst the group.
Yeah, the gang is back together again.
Yeah.
I see Dr. Rick Smith of Oklahoma is back on the line here. Rick, how you doing?
I've been promoted. I'm gone 2 weeks and I'm a doctor. That's awesome. I'm looking at Kim and Neil. There's no way I'm anywhere close to a doctor, but anyway. No, it's good to be back. Just like Jen, week before last, we had severe weather. We had a lot of severe weather on the 2nd, again on the 4th, and then still kind of cleaning up from that. Had a big graduation over the weekend. My son graduated from OU in bachelor's in music education. He's going to go be a poor music teacher at some high school now, but he's doing what he loves, so that's what's important. So,
it is
good to be back.
Outstanding. So Kim, is the death ridge set in for? Is the tornado season done for you?
Maybe. Probably. I mean, Rick is really the person to ask about that. But I was trying to over the last couple of days look for any hint of hope on the horizon, and we might be in line for getting some storms possibly next week, but it's very unclear. It's very uncertain. Just the signal is there that it's a possibility. So what I'm really looking forward to is this weekend we're supposed to cool off, and that is a pretty high confidence forecast. And the exact degree of cooling we'll have to see, but some of the temperatures I was seeing were just positively inspiring. So I'm really grateful that we'll at least have a day or two where we don't get up to the 90s. That'll be a distinct improvement. But before we get there, this week is going to be awful. So just everyone in the South Central Plains be thinking, if we just can make it through this week, things will get better. Just hold on to that hope.
So Troy, the question is, does that cool air reach you in Austin?
I think the front does come this far south, and my goodness, we'll be down to 66 for morning lows by Saturday night or Sunday night. For us, that's something else. Today, 99 degrees at Camp Mabry. That tied the all-time record for the date at Camp Mabry, and that period of record goes back to the 1890s. So that kind of gives you some indication there. Probably record-breaking down here, James, over the next couple of days. Our record, we have Weather Service, I love how they termed it, it's low-hanging fruit. The records are pretty low over the next couple of days, and so it's not that hard to be able to kind of tear into them a little bit over the next couple of days. So anyway, our big hope as we wrap up from Austin, Texas, is that we get a drop or so of rain. It has been so pitiful the last couple of months, and we just we need some rainfall, and it's pretty bad, Kim, when you get excited with a QPF of a quarter to a half inch, but that's what's happening right now.
Well, you take what you can get.
Yep.
Let's see. Neil, where you like North Carolina, Washington?
I'm
Florida?
in North Carolina. I drove down over the weekend. My kids had an outdoor scouting event that got moved indoors, and I was on the hook for doing the forecast. So I was very nervous that it would verify, and it did verify, by the way. But there were some people who were like, "Why would you? What makes him the person you go to for your forecast.
He's the czar of numerical weather prediction.
They don't know who Neil is. Come on.
I just went to the Raleigh forecast discussion and translated it into plain English. So shout out to the forecast office there. They got it right.
You need to play them this line.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
Yes, you're kind of a big deal. So let's see. Bill Murray better get this show on the road here before our guests bail and run.
Yeah, James, I'm really excited about tonight's show. First, we have our old friend of the show, Sean Potter, who has done a little bit of everything. Writes a column for Weatherwise. Is a man about town. Of course, he wrote the book Too Near for Dreams about Cleveland Abbey, who we'll talk about tonight. Sean, it's nice to have you back.
Great. It's great to be here, Bill. Hi, everyone.
Are you in Minnesota?
Yeah. I am in Washington, D.C. right now. And we had some severe weather rolling through our nation's capital.
Yes, you did.
Yes,
I had a severe thunderstorm warning that I got to give to my hotel in Haymarket today.
Oh,
which was kind of cool because I told them this morning to look out for bad weather, and I'm thankful that it verified because otherwise they would have thought I was a crackpot.
Yeah, we had it. I think the worst of it missed DC per se. It looked like I was watching maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon as this huge cell just developed mostly to the south and moved off into the Chesapeake Bay. And I tell you, it was really maxing out on the DBZ scale there. It's not too often you see the whites. I haven't seen that color on there for a while, but yeah, we were in the enhanced risk area for a little while, and then SBC moved us to the slight risk as the system progressed.
Yeah, I was not wishing to be with anyone who was on I-66 when that storm was coming in from the west, because I bet that was a nightmare with all the construction going on there. But we're so glad to have you here tonight, Sean. Thank you for making this happen. And tonight our guest WeatherBrain is David Schultz. He's the chief editor of the Monthly Weather Review. He's at the University of Manchester in England, so he is early in the morning. David, we've never been able to get a guest on from the UK because they must all be early retiring folks. So what made you stay up late to talk with us tonight?
Sean was very convincing.
He can be that way, that's for sure.
Sean the enforcer. I like it.
So now, David, I know you grew up in Pittsburgh. Talk to us about your career and how it progressed and took you to England.
Well, that's quite a long story.
That's a long coverage there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got my undergraduate degree at MIT, and then I went to the University of Washington for my master's, then the State University of New York for my PhD. I ended up then going to the National Severe Storms Lab in the University of Oklahoma for 10 years. I had an opportunity then to become a professor of experimental meteorology at the University of Helsinki and Finnish Meteorological Institute. And it was there that I met my wife, and she got a job in England, and so we came to England.
Well, we're grateful that you're with us tonight. I heard someone introduce you on one of the videos of a talk that you and Sean gave, and she introduced you as being from the SUNY, Alabama. And when I heard that, I about fell out of my chair. So I don't know how she made that mistake. But anyway, I didn't know we had a State University of New York, James, here in Alabama. But David quickly corrected her, and they were off and running. But that was a pretty interesting miss right there. So, they're saying my mic may be incorrect, and it is. About this because that's the problem we often have. How about that, James? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, now it sounded like Bill was in a urinal at the airport in Austin down near Troy, and so we
Bill,
yes,
are you?
We have this problem every week.
Well, you'd think I would check it, and I'll make it a checklist, put it on the bottom of my computer for next week. But you think when it learns, one time you think it would remember, but anyway.
Don't go there. Yeah.
So, but anyway, this is the oldest continually published meteorological journal in the world, right, David? And David may be muted, or maybe y'all don't hear me. There we go.
No.
Maybe.
Hello.
Dave can't hear you.
I got an unstable internet. Sorry.
No problem. David, can you hear us okay now? John, I'll let you jump in if you want to answer that one. I understand it's the oldest continuously published meteorological journal in the world, right?
Monthly Weather Review, the oldest continuously published meteorological journal in the world, one of the oldest scientific continuously published and still published scientific journals in the world. And I think if you want to, go further, probably one of the oldest just continuously published journals, but definitely the oldest meteorologically. I think it even predates the Royal Met Society journals. Celebrating its 150th, publishing its 150th volume this year. So the January issue was volume 150, number 1, and that's obviously a very significant milestone for any publication. So about a year ago, Dave reached out to me and said, "Hey, he's the current chief editor of Monthly Weather Review. It said that AMS is looking to make a big splash this year with the 150th, and wanted my help in doing. At the time, it was just going to be an editorial. Is that right, Dave? I don't know if you back and can hear us now.
Yes, it was just going to be an editorial,
like 1,500 words or something, right? I don't know.
I think you blew that out of the water with the article that you.
Yeah, so somehow I think we both forgot that over the course of the next several months as we kept finding all this great info to add to it, and Dave was sort of looking to me to really work on the historical stuff for the first part of the journal's history. And of course, he's the real expert on the more recent period since AMS took over from what was first the Signal Service, then the Weather Bureau and the National Weather Service. And was it 1974? AMS took over, and of course, Dave's been at the helm for about 20 years now. Is that right, Dave? Almost.
This is my 15th year.
Oh, well, 15 years, and the second, correct me if I'm wrong here, the second longest tenure of any chief editor of Monthly Weather Review. Is that correct?
I'll go with what you said. I hadn't really noticed.
I thought we discussed that one point. I thought it was, but anyway, it's certainly a milestone for your career as well, and for the journal. So yeah, that's sort of how this collaboration got started.
Well, I have to say that writing with Sean was one of the best experiences I've ever had. We just off on exactly the same points and knew where to take it, and when he made changes, was very sympathetic to the changes that he was making to the manuscript. So it was a real pleasure to work with.
Thank you. And I would say the same with you. I mean, we both are degreed meteorologists, and I have to say it was wonderful to see that you have so much technical expertise, that you also have a real knack for being able to tell stories and to weave compelling narratives. And it should be no surprise, because you literally wrote the book on eloquent science. In fact, that you wrote the book Eloquent Science, also published by AMS. So I think that had a lot to do with it, that we kind of found that common thread, and it really did, as Dave said, it was one of the best. I don't tend to collaborate a lot in my writing, freelance writing. I tend to be sort of the lone wolf when it comes to that. And so I think I was almost a little skeptical at first. And once we got into the rhythm, I realized this is a really great collaborative partnership. And I think we were both a little sad to see it end, and we had to finally put a bow on this in around October, November timeframe, right? And get it off to AMS to start, getting the proofs set and everything. And so looking forward to the next one.
So the editor didn't give you any trouble about the length, guys? That was okay.
We had a little bit of an advantage, I think, in that we had a little. Well, Dave, do you want to tell the part about how they actually had to create a new department for our piece?
Yeah, so normally editorials are set full column. So the normally journal articles at the AMS have 2 columns, and the authors' names are in the title or up front, because it had grown so long, and it really had the structure of a journal article. And we knew that we didn't really have time to send it through a full peer review process like it would go through with a regular article. We posed the question to the AMS publication staff and said, what should we do? We're in this dilemma here where it really looks like an article, and it should be structured like an article, but we're not going to have time to send it through peer review. What do you want to do? And they came back with this really clever solution, which was, we're going to create a new department called historical review. We of course publish review articles under the department reviews, but so they created a brand new department for us. It's the only article I'm aware of now, but certainly if other people wanted to try this, the AMS could possibly be open to that.
So you mentioned, Sean, that it started under the auspices of the Signal Corps. So take us back to 1873, the first year. How did it start out? What was it like? And you and David both comment on that.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting history, and it's one that it dates back almost to as far back as the Signal Service or Signal Corps itself, in terms of being the forerunner of the nation's weather service, the National Weather Service, and being the nation's weather service at the time. Of course, National Weather Service just celebrated its 150th anniversary a year ago, and so as I mentioned, it's the 150th volume published this year, 2022, but next year, January, will be the actual anniversary of when the first issue of Monthly Weather Review was created, was published, and I kind of say that almost with some quotation marks there, because it was a much different publication, if you will, back then. We have in the historical review, we have a copy of the first issue, if you want to call it that. It was a one-page sheet, if you will, that it was essentially just what the name implies. It was a review for that month, January 1873, of the significant storms, rainfall, and temperature across the United States, and what it has grown into, and how it has grown, and then sometimes shrunk a little bit. It ebbed and flowed over the years as budgets and organizational priorities changed. But it's really quite impressive. Dave, I don't know if you have more you want to say off the top about that.
Yeah, in addition to the one page of text, there was a one-page map that tracked all the low centers during that month, and that was a feature that persisted for many years, tracking the lows. And over the years, as Monthly Weather Review evolved, they would have more charts per month, usually somewhere between 4 and 8 charts. And these included mean temperatures, precipitation amounts, snowfall depth for the month, those kinds of things, as well as interesting maps from weather events that were explored in the text.
Talk about its transition from more of a weather summary to a real meteorological journey or journal.
That's probably you, Sean.
So let's see, when did that? Well, I think a lot of it, it was really attributed to the person who's, I wrote the biography about. Bill, you mentioned Cleveland Abbey. He for many years. Well, he was very instrumental in the early days. He was one of several people who was responsible for the very first issues. The very first issues did not have an editor attributed to them initially. And so, by the way, just as a little bit of a side note, one of the things that Dave and I did that really took a lot of time, although I found it to be kind of a really fun exercise in playing sort of a detective here, was to try to compile for the first time ever a list. We have it as a table one in the historical review of all of the editors, chief editors. They went by various names over the years, who were basically in charge of the journal. And to the best of our knowledge, that has never been done before. So we have that, Cleveland Abbey was one of several people starting in 1873 who worked on a rotating or alternating schedule. And again, with the individual issues uncredited. And it's worth mentioning that there are two other individuals who are instrumental in the early days of Monthly Weather Review, and that is Thompson B. Murray, who was one of Abbey's contemporaries in the forecasting probabilities division, indications division, as it was known various times, of the Signal Service, and then Henry Calver. And they were responsible for preparing several issues that summarized the weather for the last half of the year 1872, although those were actually published retrospectively. So and they were initially published as part of as appendices to the annual report of the chief signal officer at the time. And it wasn't until a number of years later that this actually came out as a bona fide journal that sort of stood on its own. And so they published these monthly weather reviews for 1872, and that has created some confusion over the years as people look at that and they say, well, 1872, that must be when the journal started, because that's obviously a year before 1873. But we very carefully researched this and determined that no, it actually, based on everything from historical records and to congressional testimony from some of the chief signal officers in the late 1800s, indicating that it began in 1873. But then Abbey took over as editor and was credited as such in let's see, I think it was 1893. In fact, August 1893 until June 1909, he was the chief editor. And it was during this time that we saw the journal really start to be transformed into a serious scientific journal with articles that were solicited and attributed to their authors and on serious research topics. And that, I think, continued for a number of years, and until there was a period where there was a bit of a scale back, and basically, let's see, when was I'm actually just looking at that table right now to see. I think that was in 1910, I believe, 1910 to 1913, when it was decided that Monthly Weather Review would be, again, essentially just a summary of weather statistics and some company charts for the most part. And so a lot of the serious research article nature of it was sort of scaled back for a number of years. Cleveland Abbey actually was removed from its post as editor. There's a whole other, kind of story along, that talks about that period where he was sent to Mount Weather in Virginia, and he was in charge of a new Weather Bureau publication there called the Journal, the Journal of the Bulletin of the Mount Weather Observatory, I believe, that was supposed to be taking over as the journal that would publish all of the technical articles for the Weather Bureau. That was fairly short-lived. And then in 1914, Abby came back at the helm of Monthly Weather Review, was there for about a year and a half until he became ill and had to take a leave of absence the year before he died. He died in October 1916. And around that time, one of his sons, Cleveland Abbey Jr., who had a short-lived career in the Weather Bureau, had taken over. He was assistant editor for a while and then took over as editor. And then there were some other changes that happened later, in going into the mid 20th century. And Dave, I don't know if you want to talk about some of those. And
yeah, so during World War II, the journal scaled back again on the types of articles that it was publishing, and so that kind of entered the was mostly a data journal. But in the rebirth of the journal after World War II, they got rid of the monthly charts, and it became primarily then mostly articles, although they still had annual summaries of tropical cyclones, monthly articles about weather and circulation around the hemisphere or the planet. And then, as well as starting in the 1960s, pictures of the month, which featured new imagery from the new meteorological satellites that started to be launched in the 60s, and they were showing these things for the first time.
Yeah, it's interesting that Harold Corzine, who was editor, was right before the AMS took over, I believe, is that he was editor for the 100th anniversary, I believe, and he wrote sort of a briefer historical review, if you will, of the journal's history at that time. And he kind of coined this term. He talked about journal was essentially, as Dave mentioned, just a summaries of weather and climatological statistics. And in fact, he's quote him as saying that only occasionally were articles on some special weather occurrence or local forecast study published during these periods. But then, yeah, and then in going into the by the way, there's a figure that, and this is Dave deserves, I think, most of the credit for this. It's figure 2 in the article, very intricately kind of weaving together lots of different data points to show how the journal evolved over this 150-year period, and everything from the number of pages published, the number of articles published, and it's kind of interesting to compare those. And there were times when there were lots of pages but not many articles, and then later now there are lots of maybe there were some periods where there were lots of articles, not many pages, and different departments and so forth. And yeah, you can see how World War II and then going into the 50s, there was some hard times for Monthly Weather Review. And I think that Dave, you can probably speak to this a little bit better than I can, that going from that 1950 to 1970 period, the Weather Bureau was trying to sort of figure out what to do with the journal and how they could make it sustainable long term. And I think it eventually became clear that it would take an organization like the AMS to really continue to publish this journal in the way that it deserved to be published.
Yeah, that was in the period when Noaa started publishing it, and the idea then in the late 60s, early 70s, there was this desire for the government to stick to what it was supposed to do best, and running a scientific journal was not deemed to be in Noaa's interest, and where they should be predicting the weather and supporting that, and so they approached the American Meteorological Society about taking it over, and they came to an agreement with the AMS to transition over a 3-year period where Noaa would contribute some money to help get it spun up, at the same time that the AMS was now in charge of it with their own editors, and spinning that up. And the first editor, it was called the editor because it was only one of them, but he was the chief editor, was Chester Newton. He was the first editor of Monthly Weather Review under the AMS, and he ran that. And during that time, the success of the journal was tremendous, and they exceeded the growth that they imagined, and Chester was assisted by his wife Harriet, and there's correspondence that we were able to find in the archives showing that Harriet was burning through postage faster than they were budgeted, and had to ask the AMS for more money.
And so you mentioned in the presentation that I saw that Abby was sort of radical with some of the changes he made. What made you say radical, and what were some of your favorite articles that appeared in the early journals under Cleveland Abbey?
Did we say radical? No, it's yeah, I mean, I think he was really looking to sort of shake things up in terms of really setting a high standard for scientific communication of his time. He was really one of Abby's one of the things that I think he's known for, or probably should be known for, is being a bridge, conduit, if you will, between some of the research that was taking place in Europe at the time that he was he had a roughly 45 year career in the nation's weather service since almost the very beginning, starting January 1871. So it was just under a year since the signing of the joint resolution that essentially created what's now the National Weather Service. Like I said, up until just before his death in 1916. And so I think he tried to make himself useful in a number of ways, and one of those was trying to help diffuse scientific knowledge on various topics related not just to meteorology per se, but other related areas as well, oceanography and physical geography and hydrology. The things that make the AMS more than just the AMS. It's more than just the American Meteorological Society in terms of there's a very broad scope of disciplines that it embraces. And I think back in his day, Abbey tried to do the same and use the Monthly Weather Review as a means for doing that. In some cases, translating works himself and soliciting articles, notes. One of the things that I really like looking back, and this is actually, I think, one of the ways, the way that I really first learned about Abbey myself is, back in, the first article I wrote for WeatherWise was about the Wright brothers, and it was to coincide with the centennial of their first flight in Kitty Hawk in December 1903. And of course, always heard about how the weather influenced everything from, and climate influenced everything from their choice of that location as a proving ground, if you will, for their gliders, and then later their airplane, to the point where they actually wrote to the Weather Bureau and asked for and were sent copies of Monthly Weather Review, and from the tables determined that Kitty Hawk would be in Kill Devil Hills would be the ideal location. And so I would go to the Noaa library, and at the time you could actually go in there and browse in the stacks the bound actual printed copies of Monthly Weather Review, and I found this note that Cleveland Abbey, and I don't think I knew much about him at the time, certainly not as much as I do now, had written for the December 1903 issue about the Wrights and their work in Kitty Hawk, and I thought that was just fascinating, and started seeing all these other little, what he called notes from the editor, and I think these were like little gems that he published during his tenure, where they weren't, some of them were just maybe a few dozen words in length, but they would be on some very, very interesting topics, and it would be things that he read, or somebody sent him some correspondence about migratory birds, or maybe pondering the weather on Mars, for example, and I think it's very interesting to go back and look at some of those, and we tried to capture what some of the more interesting ones were. Dave, I'm sure, has his own thoughts about some of the more interesting articles from that time period that
Yeah, I like the one that's called Yellow Snow in Michigan.
Show title.
There you go. It was bound to happen. And there's a Frank Zappa connection too, right, Dave?
Correct.
Yeah.
So now the journal, the Monthly Weather Review, had some competition in the 1880s. How did that happen, and what eventually became of that?
So there was another journal, the American Meteorological Journal, that was published. Mark Harrington, who was a professor from the University of Michigan, and later became the first civilian head of the Weather Bureau, and then was ousted by the Secretary of Agriculture, and essentially disappeared from his family, from his friends in society, and was later found several years later at a sane asylum in New Jersey, where he spent the rest of his life. That's a whole other story, but a very fascinating one. He had published or co-published the American Meteorological Journal, and was really trying to make it the preeminent meteorological journal in this country, at least at the time. And they did the two coexisted for a while, but that one fell into some hard financial times, and eventually folded. And so that really allowed Monthly Weather Review, allowed the Weather Bureau, under especially with Abby's editorship, to really rise in prominence, and sort of take that position, if you will, as the leading meteorological journal, at least in this country.
And I think the other interesting thing there too is that the Weather Bureau and well, even during its signal service time, there were a whole range of publications of weather data, agricultural data, and Monthly Weather Review would see mergers with this data, and then stuff would be spun out So, we're publishing astronomical data and seismic data for a while, and then those were spun out to other publications. And but the constant has been monthly weather review, and the other constant is the crop report. I forget what the full title of that is, but that's another one that originated around the same time, has the same kind of longevity, but has survived with more or less the same title.
I have a bunch of JB's copies of the crop bulletins back here in my library, and those are a real treasure to me, because he obviously took very good care of those. It seemed to me that there was a period where the monthly weather review was in such great demand that there were discussions about how to conserve issues audit because there was a limited supply.
Yeah, there was. You would see notices in issues saying, "Don't throw them out." And I guess the background there is that all the cooperative observers who were contributing to the journal received this amounted to as much as 2,000 or 3,000 copies that were being printed for free and sent to the people who were providing the data, which made sense, but it was an expensive proposition, and that limited the number of other issues that they could publish and send to their office, universities, or college, and so yeah, you'll find during that time around the turn of the century, lots of desire for these copies. Send them to various libraries. When you're done with them, send them back to us, but don't dispose of them.
Yeah, and I think there was also a period maybe a little later toward the mid 20th century where some you'd go back and look at the Weather Bureau had this topics and personnel, or it was sometimes called, for a while it was called just Weather Bureau topics, then topics and personnel. And I think it was just Weather Bureau personnel. These are their internal publication at the time. And it was interesting to go back through the pages of that over the years and see what they said to the employees, to the forecasters and the operational staff about monthly weather review. And there was a period where they were basically told, we can't have everybody subscribing to this. We can't have every Weather Bureau employee, or and they were limiting it to like one issue per station, per office. And if you're interested, you share the copy, if you will, share the issue. I think it's also worth knowing. It's very interesting that there was a lot of demand for monthly weather review, and then there was also an interest. Especially Abby was very interested in promoting weather in meteorology as a subject in schools and among even in public schools, secondary schools here in Washington. He would go lecture to teachers and basically telling them how they could create lessons, if you will, and curricula that was scientific in nature and help promote meteorology. And I think and to some degree to maybe help spark interest in those students who really maybe wanted to go to the next level and pursue a career in forecasting, with the Weather Bureau. And so he saw monthly weather review as a great outreach tool. And there's some of the things that I find one of the things I found most fascinating in telling the story was a letter that Abby wrote in 1900 to Booker T. Washington, then head of the Tuskegee Institute, and basically he offered him copies of the monthly weather review and some other Weather Bureau publications for use in the institute. And so it's it's really interesting, kind of the breadth and scope of individuals with whom he communicated in trying to spread knowledge and to increase interest in meteorology, and how he used the publication as a means to do that.
David, talk about the transition to the AMS in the middle 70s, how that came about. And I understand that the president of the AMS dictated that it would have to be profitable within 3 years, or they would not continue to publish it. How close did it come to a demise at that point?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the government wanted out of publishing monthly weather review, approached the AMS, and what would have seemed like a no-brainer decision at the time was actually pretty carefully reflected. And one of the reasons was that the AMS was already publishing several journals. They had the Journal of Applied Meteorology. They had the Journal of the Atmospheric Sciences. And they wanted to make sure that Monthly Weather Review did not impact the continued success of those journals. So yes, there was that condition that the Monthly Weather Review had to fall into the fold of the AMS stable of journals in a smooth manner, and they accomplished that by adjusting some of the boundaries of the journals. And one thing I think that stood out for Monthly Weather Review was this was where a lot of the literature on early numerical weather prediction was being published. The early work by Smagorinsky, Minabe, of course, Nobel Prize winner, on general circulation. These were in Monthly Weather Review. And so that was an easy sell because neither of the other journals really filled that mission, so to speak. And then, as you mentioned, the second criteria was that it couldn't be a financial burden on the AMS. But again, as I mentioned, under the leadership of Chester Newton, submissions took off. And as Sean mentioned, if you look at the figure in the historical review where we plotted the number of pages, the number of articles each year, you see that it kind of stagnated in the 50s and 60s. But after the AMS took over, the period of stagnation was gone, and it just was in an upward trend.
Well, I find this history of such a venerable publication that I've enjoyed for so many years to be very fascinating. One last question. Well, two questions. I keep saying I'm only going to have one more question, but there was a proposal in the early 90s to roll all the journals into one. Is there a chance the Monthly Weather Review would have gone away at that point?
Certainly, that was a proposal in the early days. Well, not early days, but as electronic journals were taking off, and people were kind of foreseeing the end of print. In other words, we don't need to print and mail 3,000 pages a year to libraries when people can just download the articles they want in PDF form themselves. And so Carrie Emanuel and Bill Randall made a proposal to the AMS to form the Journal of the American Meteorological Society, which would subsume all the individual journals, the 9 journals that we had at the time, and bring them into one. And the Publications Commission at the time debated it, decided that the loss of continuity of all these journals, their individual specialities, the loss of that would outweigh the the benefits of having a single journal where all the articles were in it, and so that didn't go through. But yeah, monthly weather review, that would have killed its run, and it wouldn't have seen 150 years.
So, David, it's, now everything being electronic, I'm sure it's a lot different. Talk about how difficult it was to submit an article for publication in the pre-digital times.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with how the process works now, you write a paper, you create a PDF or a LaTeX version, and you upload it to a website and provide information about the authors and so forth. The manuscript gets checked, and then it gets sent to the chief editor, and then eventually to a handling editor. What happened before that time, and this would have been before the late 1990s, when this started, when digital submissions started becoming more commonplace, you would make 5 photocopies of your article. You would bundle them up into a big package and mail them to the office of the chief editor, and they would have an assistant there who would unpack those and give the chief editor a copy, and then the chief editor would then decide, okay, we'll send this to one of our editors. And at that time, there were only 3 editors in the monthly weather review, and so then these would be sent then to that person, who would then identify reviewers, get reviewer confirmation that they wanted to review it, and then mail a physical copy of the article to them. And you can imagine that this was a very time-consuming process. It certainly consumed a lot of paper, a lot of postage, and it slowed the process down quite considerably. And then yeah, the exchange of reviews would take time, and again, sending 80-page documents back and forth through the mail with all the responses to the reviewers' comments. It was I can't believe that we went through that nowadays, or back then, and that nowadays it's so much more efficient.
Dr.
And you
Dale,
got some new.
I know you have a question, and then I know Kim wants to ask something, and then anyone else can join in. And then I understand from Sean that we're going to play a little pop quiz here, so we'll see how smart or dumb we are about the monthly weather review.
Well, you are the WeatherBrains, right? So I mean, I wouldn't expect.
We reserve that title for you, David. You and Sean. We're the panel.
I've got maybe like a general history question, and then I've got some more monthly weather review specific stuff. So when I was actually writing a BAMS paper last year, and one of the sections dealt with dealing with some of the history with back to like the Signal Service and the Weather Bureau. And I had talked to some folks that were historians at the Air Weather Association, and they had sort of given me a lot of background material. And it was interesting that there was this caveat that this is hotly contested, and it depends on who you ask about the timeline and the history and everything else. And we had a section in the paper, and one of the reviewers, I guess, as we were warned, was like, this is not how it happened. You've got it all wrong. We ended up just taking the section out because we were over word count anyway. But where is the authoritative source on the history of this is, pre-Noaa, like Weather Bureau, Signal Service, like back when airmail ended up in the Department of Commerce and stuff like that? Like, is that as contested as I feel like it is, or?
It's a great question. I think it depends maybe on the specific period, a specific, topic or aspect. And there are a lot of different histories, if you will, that have been published over the years. And I think, one thing is to look at who's published them. Were they published by historians, and did they do, rigorous historical analysis in doing, in putting it together? Was it, did they involve primary sources, so sources that were created by individuals at the time versus, secondary sources where basically, looking at somebody else's analysis of that. And there are a few, again, if you're looking at sort of the history of the well, I'll say this, the nation's weather service, the NWS lowercase, of course, going back, including not just the present day National Weather Service starting in 1970, the Weather Bureau before that starting in 1891, and the Signal Service from 1870. There are, I think, a few sort of gold standard histories, if you will. One of them was written by somebody named Donald Whitnah, Whitnah. I believe the University of Illinois, and this was in the 50s. And he wrote so it doesn't cover the recent history. And of course, we've got a lot better, source material, documentation, we know sort of, with what of, and there have been better preservation, and techniques that have probably happened, since Noah's inception. But he actually came. The book was a result of his doctoral dissertation, and I think it's just called A History of the Weather. I know I've got a copy that I look at all the time when I'm doing something that has to, I want to verify what's something that took place in some of those early years. And it's really amazing what he was able to do back in the digital age, looking at all kinds of sources, newspaper articles, congressional testimony, actual records from the early days. So I think that's one source that I tend to rely on a lot. I know some of the folks here may know or be familiar with Jim Fleming, who's now professor emeritus at Colby College in Maine, and he's one of the preeminent weather historians of our time, and he's written like a dozen books on everything from the history of meteorology in America to history of weather modification, and so and he's been a bit of a mentor to me, and so I really look to him also as a source that I can trust, and I think that's kind of what it comes down to. I will say, I think it's unfortunate that Noaa does not have an actual history office. And I don't know, I'm actually, not to turn the tables, but if that's something that I as a former administrator, I'm kind of curious, if that's something that was, ever discussed. I mean, there are a number of agencies in the federal government, including scientific agencies, that have had that find the value in having an actual, like a PhD historian lead a history office, to not only to help archive and make sure that these stories can be told to other researchers, but also to help be the source for telling that agency's history. And I've always found it, as a former weather service employee, a little bit curious that there are people and who do serve sort of a de facto sense that role, and have over the years. And folks at the Noaa Library, I know Skip Thibrage was one, John Cloud. We now have for the Weather Service, Greg Romano has been doing a great job with leading the heritage program and doing a lot of oral histories, I think, and helping tell some stories there. But there's not an actual Noaa historian. I've always found that to be a little interesting.
That's a great point. Like there's a lot of people that I've run into at Noaa who do this. I don't necessarily think it's part of their official job, but there's folks in comms and other parts within Noaa who've sort of taken on this role, and they've even started gathering a lot of material, but I don't know that anyone's officially tasked to do it. And not necessarily in any kind of official formal role, because when I was roaming the halls, there's like random closets full of all sorts of amazing information.
Oh yeah,
that could be a total different show.
when I worked in comms at the Weather Service for a number of years, and I remember, and that's, it was great to like on a break or something, or go over to the library. And unfortunately, the Noaa library has physically had to shrink its size, so you can't go in there now and just. I think they still have the bound monthly weather reviews, but they're not on the shelves as easily accessible. And we were very indebted to Dave and I were indebted to the staff at the Noaa library to help go in, especially during the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, when folks were not in the office, to go in and find us, what, like the original that figure one with the first issue from January 1873 came from the Noaa library. And but yeah, I remember once we got a box that was sent by, I think it was the WFO in North Platte, Nebraska. And I don't know if they were cleaning house or something, but they found all of this. A lot of it was outreach material from like the late 1960s, early 1970s. And luckily they knew enough. They had the foresight not to just ditch this in the dumpster or whatever. They thought, well, this might be useful to somebody. So they boxed it all up, sent it to headquarters in Silver Spring, ended up in the comms office where I was working at the time. And my former colleague, John Skoda, who worked there for a number of years, and I, and he did a lot of the internal comms and controlled correspondence. And for many years, he was editor of the NWS Insider, I think was what it was called at the time, this internal employee newsletter. And we unboxed it and we're looking through it, and there were like 35 millimeter film strips with and slides with material on how people would go around, to like probably spotter training and school talks and things. Again, this is like circa 1970, right around the time when Noaa was created, talking about watches versus warnings. And there was, I remember, which is something that obviously, and Kim can probably can tell us all, talk about this, probably unfortunately with some frustration about, trying to get people to understand the difference. I'll just say this, I'll tell this briefly and then move on, that there was one piece of one little slide in there that really, and I think we scanned it and used it in the internal employee newsletter publication, that really, I think today still was a great way to illustrate the difference between a watch and a warning. And it was sort of an illustration, kind of a cartoonish illustration of this guy leaning against a fence out in a pasture, and he's looking over off in the distance, and there's a bull. There's a bull sitting, in the pasture, just kind of minding his own business, not a direct threat, but he's aware of it. He's aware that there's that potential threat there. And it said, this is a watch. This is what you can think of, in this context of analogy, this is a watch. And then the next frame was the bull charging at the guy, and he's, darting off with those cartoon, lines indicating how fast he's trying to hightail it out of there. And it said, that's the warning, when the bull's actually, chasing after you. But it was incredible. So we took this, and there was an LP record of, Richard Frank, the first Noaa administrator. I remember Frank's the last name. I want to say Neil Frank, but that's Hurricane Center. I think who was he was the first Noaa administrator, and it was an LP record of him doing PSAs for radio on watch versus warning. And so we took this and we brought it over to the folks at the library. I'm not sure what they did with it. but at least some of that stuff is, like you said, it maybe got shoved into a closet somewhere, but it's there, and it's and to me, in trying to tell some of these historical stories and tales, and these are real treasures to find, and if anybody has them, please hold on to them. I'm actually a member right now of the AMS History Committee, and I know one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we find ways to preserve some of these treasures. Maybe not everything's going to end up at the Library of Congress, like Cleveland Abbey papers, or not everything's going to end up at the National Archives, like all the official Weather Bureau records. But there's still a lot of things, that individuals created, and that institutions and offices created, that they may not think was very valuable. If they see this pamphlet or this storm spotting guide from 1980, but believe me, somebody 50 years down the road might really find that valuable. So anyway, long-winded way to answer your question, but I think it's an interesting discussion point, maybe for others to think about.
Agreed. That it'd be interesting to have like a more formal way to archive a lot of this stuff. So I've got a quick monthly weather review story, and then maybe a couple questions after that. So I came into weather from just plain physics, and my very first paper as a weather graduate student was in monthly weather review. And Dave, I don't know if you remember this. This was early to mid 2000s. I think you might have been like a subject matter editor, but I'd written a paper with Gary Lackman and Sethu Raman for Notes and Correspondence, and it ended up getting some somewhat contentious reviews, but not necessarily related to the science. And I remember as a grad student, the whole peer review process was a little bit new to me. I think Gary might have been the corresponding author, even though I was first author. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for helping me as a grad student navigate the review process, because it wasn't the normal review process. And it was, I left that thinking this is definitely something I can do and write more papers. But there was a point where I thought, I don't know if I'm cut out to write papers. I went into NWP because I was not good at English to start with.
Yeah, it's, I think one of the things that I'm kind of proud of during my tenure as chief editor is to recognize the diamonds in the rough and work with the authors to bring the luster to them. Some manuscripts, it's difficult to see that, and so they end up being rejected, unfortunately, which is disappointing. It's a lot of work by a lot of people to bring these things to fruition, and you would like a better outcome. I would love to accept every paper. It would certainly make my job a lot easier, and the job of the other editors at Monthly Weather Review as well. But I think that's the one thing that I think I can be proud of during this period is the effort that we've put into working with the authors to improve their manuscripts before they get published. So thanks for your story, Neil.
It was a rewarding and encouraging experience as a grad student that kept me wanting to write more papers. But that kind of leads me into another question. What do you think is the future for AMS journals? I know there's a lot of journals that are going open access, and how do you sort of look at open access versus subscription, and how does that either increase or potentially decrease the impact factor? And what is sort of the feedback loop on that with encouraging submissions?
Well, it's interesting that you raised that, because we just had our annual Publications Commission meeting last week, and these issues are always discussed. I mean, the idea of open access is a great one. Anything that's published should be freely available to anyone that wants to read it. And I mean, to me, there's absolutely no downsides to this. The only downside is the financial aspect, is that someone needs to pay. It costs money to put this thing online or print it or whatever you're going to do with it. And that's the issue. The AMS still derives a lot of revenue in their publications department from subscriptions. And if they were to go open access, then the burden would fall entirely on the authors. And there are many authors who can't afford to publish in Monthly Weather Review now. It's already quite expensive compared to other journals. And by Monthly Weather Review, I mean all the AMS journals. And so the AMS is debating this, and there are forces in government here, and particularly in Europe, that are mandating that more and more of the work that we do be published open access. Which again, I'm in favor of, but it does stress the business model of the journals.
I'm going to follow up from that question. So good to see you, Dave and Sean. Thank you for being with us. And I'll follow on to actually talk about that, the authors who contribute to Monthly Weather Review. When you guys were going through this process to think about the historical record of this journal, there's so many aspects you could have considered. I'm sure it was a difficult trek to even weed through what you wanted to cover. It seems like you've covered a lot of the big pieces of the sort of the science, the evolution of the science that's represented in the journal, and some of the organizational aspects of the contributions that have gone on and things that have gone in and out of the journal, and how broad historical forces influence the journal, things like that. But I'm curious if you had considered, and if you had learned anything about the authors who were contributing to the journal, because there's that human element to science that is so interesting and important. The kinds of ideas that will even be brought forward into the science come from people who are situated in particular places with certain kinds of training and history. And Dave, you were just talking about accessibility, being a historic issue of people being able to even get something published in a journal. But I'm just interested to hear if that was a part that you had considered, was looking at if there'd been shifts in the composition of authorship, the kinds of people who are submitting to our journal, and the places they're from, the kinds of issues they find important. We'll sort of track from those trajectories.
Yeah, that's a good question, Kim. It's certainly something that ran across my mind. I think maybe even Sean and I mentioned this, that maybe we could somehow classify manuscripts or authors and have a similar graph to our timeline of 150 years of, not just the statistics on the articles that we published, but getting more into the demographics of the disciplines that the articles were covering, and who was publishing. Were they government employees? Were they U.S. Were they affiliated in U.S. institutions, or were they from abroad? And yeah, if someone wants to do that, give us a call, and we'll cheer you on. But that's one of the things that I did do was I got in touch with the still living chief editors, and I asked them for their anecdotes and stories, and I sent an email to the map list that's run by SUNY Albany, and said, if anyone wants to tell me stories about their experiences with Monthly Weather Review, and so some of those anecdotes are woven in to the stories. We have chief editor stories about manuscripts that they handled. We ended up publishing another. This really was a short editorial, but it all was inspired by Rick Rosen at the AMS, who said basically, when he read our review, he's like, "Oh, that's great, but I've got another story," and that is how the Journal of Climate got spun off from Monthly Weather Review, and so then we pieced that together, and wrote another little editorial I guess that appeared in February or March following this. So there's all these little stories that are laying around, and Sean and I even talked about writing another monthly installment that just kind of picks up some of the scraps, these little articles around like the Yellow Snow one or the People of Mars one, and just bring a little bit of humor. These are the kind of weird things that people were publishing.
Some of them, I think that could be the title or subtitle, something, unintentionally humorous articles or notes published in Monthly Weather Review, things that weren't meant to be at the time. But if I could just maybe for a minute, I want to maybe touch on, expand on what Dave said, and to answer Kim's question, it made me think about this this specific section that we wrote in the Historical Review, and it was one of that I was really most, I think, proudest to add to it, is how Monthly Weather Review, some of the diversity that you see in some of the authors who contributed articles, not maybe in the really early days, but in the early 20th century. And if I can maybe just read this one paragraph here that I think that does a good job of describing that. While the nation's weather service consisted almost exclusively of white men well into the 20th century, glimmers of the inclusiveness that is more characteristic of the modern day Monthly Weather Review can be seen in early works published in the journal by Anne Louise Beck, and that was in 1922, Alicia DeReamer, who co-authored an article with Cleveland Abbey in 1898, and Oscar Hammonds, who published one short article in 1909, I believe, and then co-authored another one with a colleague in 1920. Beck, who received a master's degree in 1922 from the University of California, Berkeley, after spending a year studying meteorology with members of the Bergen School in Norway, based her Monthly Weather Review submissions on her master's thesis, though the accompanying map, only one of several submitted for publication, only one was published. And then this is a quote actually from a work by Jim Fleming, who I mentioned earlier, was heavily manipulated and distorted by a prejudicial editor, Alfred J. Henry, who was editor at the time. And again, this is 1922. DeReamer was a faculty member, meanwhile, at Stevens Point Normal School, now the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point in Wisconsin, who during the summer of 1898 devoted herself to work at the Weather Bureau in special lines of investigation, and among other things compiled an article on the average frequency of days of hail during the years 1893 to 97, published in the Monthly Weather Review for December 1898. And finally, Oscar Hammonds, who served in the Weather Bureau from 1907 to 1942, most of that time as an observer in Reno, Nevada, was one of the first African Americans to realize the dream of a professional career in the nation's weather service. So I thought it was really interesting, and kind of gets to your point, Kim, about who are some of these people, and especially going back to some of those earlier years who contributed. Some of them don't maybe fit the stereotypical persona of a Monthly Weather Review contributor at the time, and so I thought that was very interesting to be able to tell that part of the story.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad you included that piece. And yeah, it sounds like a wonderful point to take off from if you guys were to want to build off of this, or have somebody else who comes in to build off of it. Just thinking about it from the frame of, I mean, yes, I'm trained as a meteorologist, but also as a geographer. It's inescapable that we think about the origins of the scientists who have contributed to the cultivation of our ideas about the atmosphere over time, and where they're from. And as our field has grown, we're growing to be more inclusive. There are more people represented in our field now from developing nations, from the lesser developed nations, and the kinds of things that they're going to think about, that they find important about the atmosphere and what it does. They'll be different. And so the way that we see our planet will change and shift as we include more of those voices. And so I think it could just make a really neat study to add to what you've already put together, this great historical context, to think about the authors and who's producing the science that you're publishing in that journal. So I'm glad that you started down that road and you were thinking about it. Certainly is a whole other layer and a whole other undertaking. This was a big undertaking, but really cool that you were thinking about it.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
All right, Sean, we got a minute for a couple of pop quiz questions. Hit us with
All right. Dave, I don't know if you want to do this, or maybe set it up with just a little background of how this came about.
Yeah. So
I was just gonna say, and if you want, I have our presentation from last fall with the International Commission on History of Meteorology open, which unless you've got it, if you want to, we could.
No, you can read them. Yeah. So the way it came about was we were invited to give a presentation by the Noaa library in their regular seminar series, and one of the things that I do in my lectures is I try to end with a little quiz using a thing called Kahoot. It's a free quiz game that you can use for educational purposes, and so I do this all the time with my class. They love it. They think it's one of the highlights of the courses that I teach, and so rather than just giving a boring 40-minute seminar, I proposed the idea to Sean. Let's do a Kahoot for this, and I think we've done it one or two other times in the presentations that we've given, but yeah. So take it away, Sean.
So, and I was gonna, some folks may have seen some of this. We varied the questions, and this is, I think we called this one for the ICHM the pub style, monthly weather review pub style, as a kind of a nod to we do that here in the States too, but I know you're a big fan of that in the pubs around Manchester, right, Dave? So we'll just go right at it. And I mean, we don't have any real, I guess if anyone has some ideas, blurt them out. We'll do it a little more informally this way. So the first question: in 1878, Monthly Weather Review experimented with translating the journal into another language. What language was that?
German.
Okay. Anybody else?
No, must not have been.
German was also my guess.
We spend enough time around Harold Brooks to know that.
Yeah. It's a great guess, especially because Abby was fluent in German, but no, actually it was French. It was French, and this was something that Albert Meyer, General Meyer, this is 1873. He was the chief signal officer at the time. Had this idea to create what he called an international edition of Monthly Weather Review, and French was sort of considered, as it is now in many ways, sort of an international language, and among scientists who so they actually translated an entire issue in, I think it was the January this was 1878. General Meyer had this idea, and they translated an issue into French, published it. And as much as Dave and I tried, we would love to have seen a copy of this and included a photo of the cover in the historical review. And we enlisted the help of colleagues in across Europe, and nobody seems to have, I don't know if any copies survived. And in fact, the way we know about this is because Abby published one of his notes from the editor in around the early 20th century, I think, talking about this and saying that the unfortunately the copy of the French edition that formerly belonged to the Weather Bureau library has mysteriously disappeared, and the librarian joins with the editor in the hopes that several of our numerous correspondents have or know of copies for sale or exchange. We would esteem it a favor to be apprised of the facts so that we may be enabled to complete our files. So very interesting, I thought, a little historical tidbit. Okay, and if we had
kind of like finding that first edition of Weatherwise magazine.
Oh boy, yeah, don't get us down that that rabbit hole. How many times did you have to bid on eBay for that, Bill?
Oh my God. I have all the credit in the world to give to Lourdes.
Oh, that's right.
Found
Yeah,
it
yeah.
in a weather museum that was donating their entire collection to Plymouth.
Oh,
And
wow.
she knew how much I wanted that. And it's a treasure that I keep in a safe right here.
And here I had to get mine off of eBay for, I'm not going to tell you what the
Probably for about as much as I paid you for all the other
something like that. So it all evens out, right? All right, let's move on. And if at any point
in DC, you know,
yeah, exactly.
Some clandestine transaction.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, we've told that we can do a whole nother show just talking about that story, right? All right, we got 10 of these questions. If at any point we gotta move on, just shout it out. But number 2, in February 1898, Monthly Weather Review published an article advocating for the formation of this society, which was founded 21 years later. What was that? This is a little bit, I think, easier question.
I'm not going to answer, but I know the
1898,
answer.
and it was
1898. The AMS.
The AMS, right? Yeah. And again, this was from a little note that then editor Abby wrote, titled An American Meteorological Society, where he talks about, in order to advance the interests of any enterprise, it is common to form an association and hold regular meetings for discussing the subject. So it was a little prescient in the sense of, he had this idea, and of course he passed away just about just a few years before the AMS formally came to be. So we found that was kind of interesting that he, he's in some ways maybe predicted it or had the idea. I'm sure many others did, of course, as well. All right.
Hey, James, show us your charter member card from the AMS.
Yeah, I'll dig it out.
Maybe I'll skip this one because this is a little more. Well, okay. You think that being the editor of Monthly Weather Review would give you some respect? Maybe. This editor had his name misspelled in proofs of a reprint of an article published in 1901. And
any guesses?
Time's up.
Decline.
The clue is 1901, maybe the time period there. I'll give you a hint. We've mentioned his name a number of times already.
Cleveland Abbey.
Cleveland Abbey, right?
Okay.
And this was interesting. This actually came from some research I did for the biography. In the Cleveland Abbey Papers collection of the Library of Congress, there is a series of page proofs for a reprint from his seminal 1901 paper on the physical basis of long-range weather forecasting. And right underneath the title, and I think Dave, we have this as in one of the illustrations in the Historical Review, if you want to see it. It says by PROF period, professor, but then it's spelled in small caps, CLEVBLAND, Abbey, and you can see where he took a pencil and kind of struck through that B, after the V, and so to spell my name right. Okay, so that was that one. Okay, moving on. In what year were the first monthly mean upper air charts published in Monthly Weather Review? And up to 2 bonus points if you can correctly identify the 2 upper levels. Now we don't have the benefit of showing the illustration here. So but if you know what year the first monthly mean upper air charts were published in Monthly Weather Review and what levels they depicted.
43, 44. Something, I don't know.
Anyone else?
I'll say 27, Sean. Probably with a kite.
Okay.
Yeah. They can only get it up to 850 and 500 millibars.
Yeah.
Well, they were in. Okay, I'll give you a little bit. They were in feet. The levels were in feet.
Okay.
Do you want to? So if you want to guess it, anyone else want to guess a year? It was. You're both wrong. It was actually much earlier, 1903.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the same year that the Wright brothers flew the first time. So they probably could have made use of these. Yeah, and they were for the 3,500 foot and 10,000 foot levels. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a good segue. And I think this one, if you don't get this one, then you definitely weren't paying attention for the first half of the show. Okay, on November 27th, 1899, Wilbur Wright, by the way, speaking of whom, wrote to the Weather Bureau asking about winds near Chicago. Weather Bureau Chief Willis Moore responded by sending 2 copies of Monthly Weather Review, which included average hourly wind speeds for this location, leading the Wrights to choose this location for their flying experiments. What is the name of that location?
We better all get this one.
We could all do
Kitty
it in
Hawk.
unison. Kitty Hawk,
Yeah,
North
Kitty
Carolina.
Hawk.
Right. No, WRI.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Exactly. All right. Next, now this is going to get a little more challenging, I think, with the next one. The April 1915 issue of Monthly Weather Review published an article by Harry Bateman, MA, PhD of Johns Hopkins University, first deriving this equation and its solution. And I think, Dave, I'm not mistaken, I think this is one where we did show the equation. The different.
Yeah, you have to see the equation.
Differential equation.
The partial differential equation.
It's a partial differential equation that some of us, forgot after we took that class. But this equation, known as the what equation, and so this was a little bit more challenging.
You can just read it out.
Yeah,
it's partial u partial t plus u times partial u partial x equals nu, and then the second derivative u
of u over the.
Come on now.
Yeah, come on.
Bring you back some
It's
bad
obvious.
Everyone knows this.
No, but really, there's 3 terms in it, right? The one is the time derivative, one is advection, and the other is viscosity. So there's a simple solution to this differential equation. But the Monthly Weather Review published the derivation and the solution in 1915. It's called the Bateman-Burgers equation.
Mhm.
The Bateman-Burgers equation, or just a Burgers equation, right?
Really should be Bateman-Burgers equation.
Yeah. Number 7, the most highly cited, so cited more times than any other article in Monthly Weather Review, is an article from 1963 and is 66 pages long, even 11 pages longer than our historical review. Who is the author? And it gives us, and I don't know if I should give a hint. Does anybody want to take a guess? 66. This author's name was mentioned earlier in our discussion tonight as well.
1963, 66 pages long. It's got over 16,000 citations.
Wow. Having to do, should I read the title?
Read the title and see if anyone gets the author.
General Circulation Experiments with the Primitive Equations. And this is part 1, the basic experiment.
I'm struck by the fact that our NWP czar has not weighed in on any of this.
He knows every answer. He's not saying a word.
Exactly.
I feel like this question has Neil written all over it, though.
Up until the point where you said we discussed it earlier, I thought I had an idea.
I thought I heard it. JS are the author's initials. Joseph Smagorinsky.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right. Okay. Just if we got time for just a couple more here.
We got time for 2 more.
2 more. Okay. Let me see. All right. This is an interesting one, I think. Until 1972, it was free to publish in Monthly Weather Review. Noaa then requested a per-page payment from authors' affiliations. How much were these first page charges? And bonus points if you know what those are worth in today's money. So so it's starting in 1972. What did Noaa request as a per page payment for authors at the time?
Just throw out something, 50 cents per page. Throwing it out there.
I'm going to say $50.
James is closer. It was
Really?
it was $40 at the time, which at least
Really?
when we did this I guess in 2021 dollars, it was $261 per page.
So what is it now, Dave,
is-
to publish?
It's 120.
Wow.
All right. We'll do maybe one more, and this actually gets back. It's still a worthy question because I don't think we mentioned this, the title, but we talked about this earlier, that in 2003, a proposal was floated for a new journal that would have killed the then 130-year run of Monthly Weather Review. What would this new journal have been called?
The Journal of the AMS.
Annual Weather Review.
Anyone else? Bill was right. It was the Journal of the American Meteorological Society. It was basically going to subsume all the journals, Monthly Weather Review, JAM, all of them. I guess the Bulletin too, right, Dave? Was that going to be?
Yeah, I don't remember if that was. I think at least all the scientific paper. Journals.
Yeah, all the technical ones. So anyway, that's our Monthly Weather Review pub quiz.
There
do
you
we
go.
win like a free membership in AMS for this or anything like that? No, I
Beg
guess
your
not.
pardon.
No.
Free subscription. You get your next page, your first page
free. Yeah.
free. Yeah, for your next
There you go.
submission.
On that note, so we got to take a quick break here. We got Tony Rice. We have Jen's This Week in Tornado History. We will come back and bring in Bruce Jones. We're going to do Picks of the Week and a whole lot more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Last week, a team of radio astronomers spanning 5 continents released their latest image of a black hole, this time at the center of our own Milky Way galaxy. Known as Sagittarius A star, this black hole is about 4 million times the mass of our sun and about 27,000 light years away. For comparison, if it were visible in the night sky, and it's not because gravitational pull of a black hole is so strong that not even light itself can escape, it would be about the size of a donut sitting on the surface of the moon. So how do you image something like that? The basic principle is this. You take 2 telescopes, you separate them by some distance, and measure the light, or in this case, radio waves, coming from the object. Each telescope captures slightly different parts of the incoming waves, giving you a better view of the overall structure. You combine them together, and you can see with the resolution that you'd have with a telescope the size of the distance between those 2 telescopes. The key to it all is time stamping the data with atomic clocks. Where this gets complicated, though, is that there's a lot going on out in space. Lots of things creating lots of waves. Those waves can even cancel each other out as they travel. Also, the Earth is continuing to rotate on its axis while orbiting the sun, while the solar system moves through space around that galactic center. So the solution is not to have 2, but 8 locations, essentially creating an Earth-sized telescope. That creates a lot of data, 3.5 petabytes, in fact. That's the equivalent of close to 200 years of continually streaming Netflix. That's too much to ship over the internet. So instead, several pallets totaling a half-ton of hard drives were shipped out of these observatories and were ultimately used to create the images that we saw. So what's next? How do you top 2 groundbreaking images of black holes? Researchers say they're going to continue to process more data with the hopes of further clarifying it. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me in RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, May 20th, 1957. An estimated F5 that was part of a family of tornadoes traveled close to 70 miles through Franklin and Miami counties in Kansas into Jackson County, Missouri. It is commonly known as the Ruskin Heights tornado because of the tremendous damage inflicted in that area. This is a neighborhood in southeast Kansas City. It has also been called the Kansas, Missouri tornado and the Ottawa, Kansas City tornado. Along the path, many homes were leveled and there were reports of multiple vortices. A total of 44 people were killed, 37 of which occurred in Missouri. 4 members of one family in Spring Hill, Kansas were fleeing their house and heading for their car when they were swept away by the tornado. Thomas Grisoulis in significant tornadoes denotes F5 damage to housing developments and to some of the 15 stores at a shopping center in Ruskin Heights. A canceled check from Hickman Mills was found at Ottawa, Iowa, 165 miles away. Pilots reported debris at an altitude of 30,000 feet. Explore more tornado history at tornadotalk.com. Calling all weather enthusiasts. Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band at amsweatherband.org. As an AMS Weatherband member, you'll get to go behind the scenes with the scientists of the American Meteorological Society, whose members have been at the forefront of weather, water, and climate research for over 100 years. You'll learn about the very latest research from the scientists who are actually doing it. What's more, you'll become a part of a passionate online community of weather enthusiasts. Get access to exclusive videos, webinars, and other fun content, and support the science you love. Learn more and join the band today at amsweatherband.org.
We've been talking a lot about the American Meteorological Society tonight, and we thank them for their support of the show. We also thank Midland Radio for their continued support of WeatherBrains, making this show possible. And Bruce, tonight we've been talking about the history of the monthly weather review with our friend Sean Potter and with David Schultz, the primary editor. I think we're going to nominate you to write a history of Noaa Weather Radio for a monthly weather review. What do you say?
Well, yeah, maybe I could. I think there are probably folks up at NOAA headquarters in Silver Spring who could do an even better job. But I used to have a whole collection, maybe I shouldn't say this, of monthly weather review. I called it my greatest hits collection. And I probably had 20 volumes because I would take that thing into one of the copy companies before they started cracking down on this. And I'd copy off all my favorite papers from in there. Well, just recently in moving into this office in my basement last year, I finally had to send those off to the recycling center. And I'm kind of sorry that I did because I had a whole library of monthly weather review articles. And they were great reading.
It was illegal?
Yeah, highly. Yeah, I think I was the one that caused Kinko's to start posting those signs that said you can't do that anymore. So AMS, I'm sorry. I have subscribed for many, many years to the journals, the electronic versions. I apologize. I'm sorry. The evidence is gone. It's been destroyed. It's been recycled. But I sure enjoyed having those papers because there were papers by Louis Uccellini in there. A lot of stuff, delineating the beginnings of our understanding of the jet stream and its effect on severe thunderstorms, near proximity soundings to tornado outbreaks. Lots of great articles have been placed in monthly weather review over the years. It was just a fantastic source for learning severe weather forecasting as far as I was concerned. So AMS, I apologize.
Everyone is, becoming, now that we're getting tropical weather outlooks, from the NHC, the tropics are coming into focus now. So Bruce, talk about weather radio and that important piece of dissemination that we have in hurricane season.
Yeah, radio is a very stable broadcast medium, especially NOAA weather radio, because generally those transmitters are located at a TV tower site. So you have a large, very prominent television broadcast tower. It's guy wired down to the ground. They're very stable. They can get knocked over. They can get damaged, but for the most part, these transmitters are located in places where they send out a very strong signal for quite a distance away. So they're very hardy and sturdy in a storm. So when we start getting into hurricane season, it's a reminder that everyone needs to have multiple and redundant ways to get this information, these warnings. And NOAA Weather Radio is one of the most stable and reliable ways you can get it, because these messages come direct from your National Weather Service office. They come immediately into your weather radio, and that's a radio broadcast. So it goes a lot farther than a cell phone tower does. I'd like to encourage everybody to be prepared this hurricane season. We always hear about the hurricane forecast. It's going to be active. It's not going to be active. But anybody who lives in a hurricane zone will tell you it only takes one. So regardless of how busy a hurricane season is going to be, that's secondary. The primary thing is be prepared in case one strikes near you or strikes your home. So we have a special offer for you if you're a listener or a viewer of WeatherBrains, and it is this. If you'll go to midlandusa.com and go to purchase a weather radio, and there's two of them here on the page. There's a emergency crank radio with a flashlight, and that's a good one to have because it also has AM and FM on it. So if your town has been hit by a hurricane, you can listen for AM and FM to get the latest news. You've also got the NOAA weather radio. So we have emergency crank radios, and then we also have the desktop weather radio. And those desktop radios you can program to go off just for your county. And you can also tell it, I don't want to hear Amber Alerts, or I don't want to hear this or that. But the bottom line is if you'll use the promo code SPANN25, that's SPAN25, you'll get 25% off on your weather radio purchase. These make great gifts. If you've got a dad who lives somewhere down along the Gulf Coast or the East Coast, somewhere where they're prone to hurricane activity, Father's Day is coming up, and I can't think of a better gift than a NOAA weather radio. A lot of people forget about them. They don't think about them, and they neglect getting one. And boy, do they regret that after they've been hit by a tornado or a hurricane. So the best way to do this is to be proactive, and I encourage everyone to get a NOAA weather radio. And by the way, the NOAA weather radio Modernization Act of 2021, I've been giving out these stickers now for the last year. They have the QR code on the back. It passed the House of Representatives. It's going on to the Senate now. And the bill tells NOAA to put $20 million more into maintaining and fixing the transmitters they have now, 1,033 of them, and then another $40 million of NOAA's money to go to upgrading and modernizing the NOAA weather radio system so we can get rid of the old copper landline telephone wires. They're very fickle now, and nobody knows how to repair them. So if we can get redundant communications from the Weather Forecast Office to a satellite down to each of these transmitters that we have, that would be the key to making the system 21st century hardened and ready to take on brand new opportunities and brand new areas of interest.
Bruce, that is awesome. I mean, that is so great to see. And I have just a really quick, fun weather radio story. My neighbor, her son was getting his Scouts badge, and he's probably 10, super smart kid. And he came by because he has to do, one of his badges is the weather badge, and he has to do like a meteorology, and he knows a lot of stuff. But he interviewed me, a meteorologist, and one of the questions was, how do you get warnings for your community? And so I said, weather radio is the number one way for you to get warnings for your community. And I said, do you have a weather radio? And he goes, I don't. I said, well, you do now. And I pulled out a little small Midland, it was the black one. It looks like a little transistor radio. His face lit up. He was so cute. And I was showing him how to use it. And I told him, you know, you can't program it or anything, but so he said he's sitting there and he's like listening to the forecast and he's repeating it. It was so cute, but he's the future of weather. He wants to be a meteorologist. And so it's so important that we can get these weather radios out there and continue to get the communities to have more and more of them to keep themselves safe.
Thank you for mentioning that. And, you know, I have over here on my bookshelf, I can't reach it from here, the Boy Scout guide to how you get the merit badge for weather. Mm-hmm. And it's an older edition. I think it has a lot about acid rain. There's like a whole page about acid rain, which used to be, you know, a much more compelling problem. But I always thought that they should add at least half a page about NOAA weather radio in that Boy Scout manual for the weather, for the weather badge. I really think that'd be a great thing for them to include in there.
You bet.
One other thing, Jen, I wanted to tell you, your today in history was the Ruskin Heights tornado. Mm-hmm. As I sit here, I'm looking due north. that tornado passed about 1 mile north of where I am right now.
Oh my goodness.
And in fact, around here, if you find really old oak trees, you can see that some of them are kind of bent over as they got kind of pulled in as that tornado went. But it passed about a mile and a quarter north of me.
Wow.
Still a few remnant scars here and there.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, I tell you what here, let's just, we got Jen on the line. Let's see if we might have any email to read this week.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
All right, I'll go super fast, but thanks everybody for writing emails. We had a lot of great feedback on our discussion about the tornado emergencies, having Kevin Laws on the show about the tornado tags. A lot of folks do use those who are, whether you're a TV broadcaster or you're doing streaming. So we had a lot of great feedback on that. We had Aiden Kinzer had a topic idea. This could be interesting. Should there be a hurricane emergency for a potentially destructive hurricane that could be very deadly, like we have tornado emergencies and a flash flood emergency?
Well, you kind of have that with the extreme wind warning.
You do, but I guess I don't know if that would be, trying to having something way ahead of time. I don't know. I mean, that's interesting, but no, that's a good point. I didn't think about that, Bill. But let's see, another one here. This is from James Lewis. As of late, everyone seems to be talking about historic drought, particularly in California. My question is, how is information about historic wetness and dryness determined? Is it found through the geologic features in the local area, or is this extracted from broader historic climate patterns? How accurate and precise is this information? Do we know?
I could try to answer that. I would say it's the further you go back in time, the less accurate it is. But look up Palmer Drought Severity Index, because that'll give you some background on how they calculate this. There's a lot of different metrics, from soil moisture to stream gauge information, snowpack, even going further back than regular observations using tree rings and other proxy information for moisture. But it's the severity index is either on a -10 to 10 or a -4 to 4, and it's baselined against this historical information. And so there's that'll kind of give you an idea of what they're working with. So, but the further you go back, probably the more uncertainty there is with the information.
Awesome. Last email here is from Chris Messo, and he wanted to alert us to the fact that Kim is moonlighting on other podcasts. So I wanted to let her speak for herself here about the Across the Sky podcast. How do people react to severe weather alerts? So he sent us that link about our wonderful Kim just continuing to help others, and even on other podcasts, we'll let her do that. So thanks everybody for writing emails. Please check those out and send us your email, whatever your requests are, email at weatherbrains.com, and check out our newsletter too. You can sign up for that at weatherbrains.com. James, back to you.
Awesome. And Kim, let's go right to you for your pick of the week as we start that segment. Go.
Thank you. So my pick of the week this week is a recently published article in another AMS journal, Weather, Climate, and Society, but I thought that it would be of a lot of interest to our audience. It's a systematic review of literature on communicating uncertainty information in weather forecasts. And it generally finds some things that I've mentioned on this show several times, but I feel like they're just hard to believe. So maybe if you see it in print with the number of articles, the full force of just how much evidence we have for this, it'll help send this point home. But the more that we can communicate forecast uncertainty, the better it is for the decisions that people can make. And it is wonderful to consider. So a great article to check out.
All right. And that'll be mine.
James, can I ask him a question?
Go.
Any chance that you divulge whether the rumor is true that you were voted most likely to publish in Monthly Weather Review in your senior high school yearbook, Kim?
If only we had categories that were sufficiently nerdy to capture where I ended up going with my life, then I'm sure that I would have cornered whatever that market was. So you can just rumor away, internet.
Great. All right, Kim, thanks. We know you got to run, but thanks for being on the show tonight. Great pick. All right, Rick Smith, I know you got a good pick for us. Go.
Yeah, we've had a lot of big hail. We had hail in our area yesterday in our CWA or near our CWA, 4.5 inches in diameter. You always see the pictures of people holding it in their hands or, with coins, or we've seen all kinds of pictures where people are holding the hailstone. My pick of the week is an article published by the IBHS, or it's a little PDF file with advice on how to measure a hailstone. It sounds pretty obvious, but especially if you get a really large hailstone, if it gets to be 4 or 5 inches in diameter, that's getting up into near record territory, depending on what state you're in. And there's a very specific procedure that you need to do to preserve that. Handle it as little as you can with your hands, put it in a sealed plastic bag in the freezer. All of that is on this PDF document. So hope you never need it, but it's a good advice on just how to measure hail. And those measurements will help the broadcast media, it'll help the National Weather Service, but it could eventually help historians down the road with these records. There was a record-sized hailstone in Texas last April near Hondo, and the one that got the record was probably not the biggest one. The one that was the biggest hailstone, no joke, was they used it to make margaritas out of that record, out of what was probably the largest hailstone of the storm. So that's not on the PDF, by the way.
Wow. Outstanding.
Did
All right.
Did they get salt on the rim, Rick, with that?
All right. So let's go to Jen. Jen, what's your pick of the week for us this week?
So we had the opportunity to provide some information to a YouTube account, Tornado Forensics, and he put together a very unique video about the 2011 Smithville EF5 tornado. It's second by second. And he actually started it, though, with the predecessor, which was the Anchor Ren tornado, and then took it through Smithville. And he takes it through everything that happened from the beginning, to the end, with satellite imagery and damage photos, video of the tornado, and what have you. We were able to help him with that. It's very unique. I had never seen something like that before. So I have the link to the YouTube video for folks to check on out with that.
Outstanding. All right, Neil, what's your pick of the week? Go.
So before I get to my pick of the week, and this is related, I did want to plug AMS Weather Band. I am going to be on there as a guest, not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday with Alicia Bentley. The topic is weather forecasting model performance, what everyone should know. Yeah, we're going to be probably talking a lot about verification. So Alicia is team lead for the global model verification and the model evaluation group, which leads me to my pick of the week. I chose this from a recent discussion on the MAP listserv on bogus canes. If you've been paying attention to the long range GFS, was pretty interested about something going on in the Gulf. And there is my pick of the week is the link to the GFS V16 official evaluation from the model evaluation group of the version 16 versus version 15. And it is true, it's more cyclogenetic. Probability of detection is up, but the false alarm rate is also up. But it's interesting when you actually look at the statistics in this evaluation. They did 2018, 2019, and 2020. If you average it out, it's the version 16's better, but the results in 2020 were a little bit strange. So anyway, my point is proper use of ensembles will get you out of this. So just use deterministic models with caution. But it'll be a link to the entire evaluation that they did for this. And it's an impressive amount of work. You can download the statistics, the PowerPoint files that they used for the briefings. It's all there online.
And that is outstanding. All right, Neil, thank you so much. All right, Bruce, what you got for us this week?
I'm going to send out a link to Representative Stephanie Bice from Oklahoma. She's the Republican who, along with the Democrat from New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, hosted this bill, the NOAA Weather Radio Improvement Act. And again, it has passed the House of Representatives. It's going on to the Senate. I would ask and encourage those of you to support the National Weather Service by contacting your senators and asking them to support this bill.
A bipartisan effort. How refreshing is that?
Yeah.
All right, Troy, what you got for us? Go.
I wanted to mention real quick, because we're sort of in a beta stage now for getting some feedback. And Bruce, this is in your backyard off northwest of Kansas City at the Aviation Weather Center. I want to share, and I know a lot of people listen, but a lot of people look as well. I'm going to share a screen for just a second and show you what we're calling the Aviation Weather Center experimental page. And this is more of the observation. This is a great situational awareness tool. We're centered on Lubbock right now. You see in orange here, the severe thunderstorm warning. We have convective SIGMETs in here as well. You can go to pilot reports in here. I kind of would prefer to have hover over instead of click, but METAR data as well, just that easy. But this is a great situational awareness tool, and I think people ought to look at this, because I really think the people at the Aviation Weather Center have really done an amazing job in coming up with this tool. And just kind of moving around for a second, I guess I ought to bow to go to Birmingham to at least look at Central Alabama here as we close up. There is on the upper right-hand part of the page, by the way, an envelope, and it tells you how you can give feedback to the Aviation Weather Center. But again, it's beta.aviationweather.gov. And if you go to the link that I provided that I'll give Bill, it's just right over Austin, but you can take this thing and adjust it and really make it nice. So again, kind of a neat website, and I strongly recommend it. Let the Aviation Weather Center people know you appreciate it. Give them some ideas. I'm sure they'll welcome that.
Outstanding. All right, Sean, we've stalled long enough. We've given you time to come up with something really good. So go.
Would it be too self-serving to I probably got the link for this already, Bill, but and James, but the link to our historical review. I want everybody to read that from the January issue of Monthly Weather Review. I was just looking at the stats for it. 1,871 views, full text views so far since it was published a few months ago. 1,413 PDF views. Let's crack 2,000 by the end of the week.
Let's do it. Let's do it tonight.
All right.
And again, all the links will be up on weatherbrains.com. All right, Bill Murray, what you got for us this week? Go.
I'll do the 3 books that were mentioned tonight by present tense WeatherBrains from tonight and from the past. James Roger Fleming's First Woman about Joanne Simpson is in my library. And of course, Sean's book, Too Near for Dreams, is in my library. And lastly, David Schultz's fabulous book, Eloquent Science, A Practical Guide to Becoming a Better Writer, Speaker, and Atmospheric Science. Those are my 3 picks of the week, James. And next week, we'll visit with Dennis Feltgen, who's retiring from the National Hurricane Center. So we're looking forward to kicking off his retirement in style next week here on WeatherBrains.
All right. Well, guys, we ran a little long here, but I think it was very well worth it. This was a great show tonight. Sean, thanks for being on. This was great fun tonight. Absolutely loved it. And we are typically here every Monday night at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. We know that most of you listen. Some of you watch the video version, live.bigbrainsmedia.com. But if you want to send us an email, we'd love to hear from you. The email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. And everything we talked about tonight, the show notes, the picks of the week, will be on the website, weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Y'all have a great week.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me. And
Good to see you.
Sean, you were outstanding. Great.